to hear from you.
Thank you, Bridget. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with me and with us. So Bridget asked me to talk a little bit about culture. It's a topic I'm passionate about when it comes to figuring out where you want to work and how you want to be happy at work. Quick introduction of me is one, yes, I lead the Career Center here, but I also on the side have created an assessment and a framework on helping people figure out how to stay motivated at work. And one of the big factors in that is being at a culture that serves you and keeps you motivated. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Culture comes up a lot in coaching appointments with students. It comes up a lot in interviews. They're questions that you often have to be prepared for. It also comes up a lot in our appointments with alumni who are being reflective about their current employment or past employment. Sometimes it can serve, our experiences in company cultures can serve as a compass as we're looking for our next journey and our next step. So I want to encourage you to be engaged as possible right now, and I want to hear from you. So either use the chat or unmute yourself, but I'd love you to share what comes to mind when I say company culture. When you think of company culture, what comes to mind for you? What does culture mean to you? Well, I can't see the chat. Nope, I can't.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. It does this. Okay, here, let me see. I'm pulling it up. Team base, I've got one person. Team base, what else? Company's personality, how happy or not people are, communication styles, ways that coworkers and supervisors interact with each other. So that communication style and that interaction. All of these things are absolutely aspects of culture. Anything else? Creativity or not creativity, right? The values, yes, thank you. You guys are saying a lot of the things I was hoping you would say, and there are a lot of the things that we're going to touch on as we go on. So thank you for that. So moving on, oh, there we go. The agenda today, what are we going to cover? I want you to know what we're going to first talk about is we're going to define what culture is based on some of the work that I've looked into and some of the research I've done and what we see here in the Career Center. We're going to talk about the different types of cultures that you may encounter that are typically there with a variety of different companies. We're going to talk about what a healthy culture is and what it is not, and ways that you can potentially be a culture ambassador and promote a more healthy cultural environment. And then you're going to have the time to create and reflect on your own culture action plan. So how are you going to really do the work to ensure that you are thriving at work and that you're at a culture that matches who you are and how you can be your best self. That is the goal today. And hopefully we'll get through with it in about 45 to 60 minutes. I want to get you back in time to get something to eat and get on with your day. So I mentioned that I've created a framework and an assessment and where culture is one of those aspects. So on the side, aside from what I do work with organizations on helping their employees figure out how to stay motivated at work. And from a lot of the work that I've done in career services for about 20 years, I have noticed that people have motivational preferences that fall in one of these 5 buckets: praise, money, impact, prestige, and culture, meaning that one of these factors is the best way to keep them motivated at work. And people usually have a top 1 or 2 motivational preferences. So I've thought about culture a lot because of this, because it comes up so much. And one of the things that I think is interesting is pre-COVID, culture was always number 2. Impact is always number 1. So pre-COVID, pre-2019, I had done maybe about 1,000 people had taken this assessment, and impact usually shows up as number 1, culture as number 2. In re-looking at the data in February of 2022, culture is still number 2, but it has increased by 10%. So it went from being 22% of the population's top MODI code to being 32% of the population's top MODI code. Still behind impact, which is in the high 30s, and so you can see that the others definitely take a smaller chunk, but it's increased in importance post-COVID. And we're going to talk a little bit about why in a minute. But first, let's define what culture is. So when I think about culture as being the character or personality of a workplace, an organization, or an environment. It shows up in the way people act, and the way people behave, and the way people communicate, and the way people are motivated. I will give you an example of how culture has shown up. I'm going to give you a student example, and I'm going to give you a personal example, just so you can sort of see how culture shows up. So I was working with a student a few years ago, and she was in our full-time MBA program. So when she first came to me, she was looking for an internship. That was her goal. She was looking for a summer internship, and she was transitioning from finance to marketing, and she was a stellar student, had a really impressive background, and was really diligent in the job search. So she sort of knew she would have probably a lot of options if she went through this job search and interview process well. And she knew what her top employer choice was. And so she interviewed for it. She networked with everyone there. She interviewed for it, and she interviewed for 2 more, as to have kind of a safety plan just in case that didn't work out. And she got offers from all of them. And so I was surprised when she came to me a few days after the offers came through for internships. And the subject of the coaching appointment was deciding on an internship. And I was like, oh, it's interesting that she's having to decide, because I thought it was such a clear shoo-in on the one that she wanted. And when she came and she met with me, she said, so I got the offer at company X. And I was like, yeah, so what are we talking about? And she said, well, I thought I wanted it. I knew it was hard to get. I know the work is interesting, but I can't shake this feeling that everyone there is like really, really serious and introverted. I was like, okay, didn't you say you worked in finance before? And she's like, yes, I know I did. But at the firm that I was at, it was a small and it was really collaborative, and we processed out loud, and we went out for drinks afterwards. And we all would hang out on the weekends sometimes. And we'd work really hard, but we also were really extroverted in the way we work. And in all my interactions with this company, it feels pretty heads down. People leave at 5, that's it. And they kind of keep things to themselves, work really hard. And it's just a little bit more introverted and serious. And it's more buttoned up than I'm used to as well. And I said, okay, well, that's a good thing to know. Why don't you maybe do a little bit more research before you say yes or no to the company? Is there anyone that you networked with through the process that you feel like you could be pretty straight with and ask some of these candid questions about it? And she said, yeah, there are a couple of people. So she did a little bit more of her digging in and networking. She came back and she said, yeah, it's introverted and serious. And I'm really extroverted. And I didn't realize that culture even mattered to me until I was presented with the potential of working in a culture that felt like it wouldn't fit. And so I don't think I can work there. I don't think that I can work in a place that might not match my personality as much. I think I need to go with company B because it feels like it matches more. So it was like that framing of sometimes when you're introduced to a culture or something not matching your personality is when you realize that it's important. I'll give you another personal example from me, and I'm going to go way back to my first job out of undergrad. So I studied elementary education as an undergrad. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher because I wanted summers off, like all the best reasons for a job search, right? Anyway, so I wanted summers off. So I took the first teaching job that was offered to me, a small, very, 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 very small private school. There was a team of 4 teachers and 1 principal. It was a brand new school. And this principal was a former kindergarten teacher herself. She had taught for 40 years. And she was full of ideas. And she also wanted to manage me in carrying out every single one of those ideas. And everyone else on this very small team was pretty quiet, kept to themselves, and did their own thing. And I was miserable. And I thought that the reason I was miserable was because I hated teaching. It turns out that that was one of the reasons. Teaching kindergarten was not for me. But I went about in my second year, I went for another job, and I worked at a large public school where I worked with a mentor teacher who was full of ideas and then let me carry them out. So she taught me a lot of things, but I was able to sort of have autonomy in my classroom. And the principal really let each teacher be autonomous and run their own little shop. It was like we were all like our own little entrepreneurs of the classroom. And I was much happier. I still knew teaching wasn't meant for me, but this case, I was able to actually understand why it wasn't meant for me, because of the function was misaligned, not because I hated the work environment, if that makes sense. I wasn't running from the job. I was making concrete decisions of this is why it doesn't work for me, but I actually love all these people and I love the way work is done. So culture can't always fix a function misalignment, but if culture is not right, it's very hard to be happy. So that's sort of a sample on how culture can show up. Why is culture so important? So a recent, actually this is a 2018 Harvard Business Review study showed that turnover, it's a Columbia University study. There's another Harvard study I'm going to show you on the next slide. This is a Columbia University study that showed turnover at a company with weak culture is 48.4%, whereas with a strong culture, it's 13.9%. So it's so important because when you're in a weak culture, you might be the one running. You might be the person turning over and running towards a job that you may or may not want, right? We never want someone running. We want people making concrete choices of finding the next best thing, but not running away from an unhealthy environment. So what is a strong culture? So based on a lot of the work that I've done with the Modi codes is I have found that strong cultures show up in two ways. One, you have cultural alignment if it matches your personality, right? Like it feels like a good cultural fit. So we'll go back to that MBA, that first year MBA that felt like this one culture was too serious for her, right? Didn't really match her personality. And two, the company culture shows that they care about you. So we're going to talk about, the next slide is going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID, but then the next few slides are going to show you what are the types of company culture, so you can sort of understand what personality may or may not fit with you. And then we're going to go into how does company culture show they care? What is a healthy culture? So how has COVID impacted culture? Why when I look at some of the Modi code assessments that I've done, so the motivator assessments, why is culture rising, right? Like, why is it getting higher and higher? So this is the HBR study that's recent. It asked asked HR senior leaders and executives about culture post-COVID, and 62% that say it's much harder to create culture now in this new world that we're in. And because of that, 24% say that culture has worsened. The good news is, though, of people that cite that they have a healthy workplace culture, 94% say that is because due to their company resilience, so their workplace resilience. So what do you think are ways that you can show or be resilient at work? What are ways that your organization, like what would be qualities of a resilient culture? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute. I've got some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Well, then I'll just share. I'll give away the answers. A couple of ways. Oh, Bridget. Oh, there is one in the chat.
Yeah, we got some.
I'm so sorry. So my thing doesn't automatically. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay. Quick to bounce back, ability to adapt. Yes. So adaptation is huge. And you can think about that through COVID, right? Like companies that were thriving were able to adapt and brought employees along with them. They're companies that are diverse and that have a diversity of thought. They're companies that feel safe, right? You can adapt and you can change really well in an environment where you feel like you're safe and heard. And finally, it's also environments where they have a focus and an appreciation on learning, on constantly learning. These are some of the aspects that define resilient cultures, and resilient cultures have been the cultures to really thrive post-COVID. I would love to hear from you before I share with you some general common types of workplace cultures and organizational cultures and some companies that represent them. I would love, and now I will actually look at the chat before I tell you guys you're not chatting, to describe some workplace cultures you have encountered, you may work at or you've worked at in the past. Lonely culture. It makes me sad. Collaborative, absolutely. No, it's okay. It's okay, Sky. I just don't want you to be lonely anymore. defensive culture. Collaborative, defensive. Yeah, these are some qualities that you might have experienced in previous employment. Small company, entrepreneurial cultures, that has its own type of culture. Bureaucratic, yes. Regressive or toxic. Unfortunately, probably a lot of us have been in environments like that. A culture that values and has different perspectives. So back to that diversity piece. And that's one of the qualities, again, that creates a resilient culture. Consensus driven. Thanks, everybody. All right. I am going to share with you some common types of cultures that we see. So I'm going to describe the culture, and then I'm going to share a company example with each, and also maybe some pros and cons to each type of culture for you to think about. So the first is an ad hocracy culture. So this is an innovative culture that takes risks. Think of tech startups. They adapt really, really quickly. They value individual initiative. Pros are that decisions are made really, really quickly. Typically, this has a really flexible work environment. You can, as long as you get your work done, we don't care when and how you get it done. This is a place where people can easily change job functions because they don't necessarily focus on specialization as much. Because they're tech startups, everyone needs to know a little bit about everything. So if you're a person that really likes to move around, this type of culture can be really good for you. It also encourages freedom and initiative. So it's a place where it's often informal and feels a little bit more free. The cons are there are low hierarchy. So it's really dependent on workforce communication being really strong. Since there's not an organized command of communication, they're really depending on all of that, the workforce to be really communicative with each other. There's often a lack of process or procedure. So it can be sometimes harder to solve interpersonal friction. And once companies go public and there are boards put in place, it's often hard to maintain because boards and stakeholders, right? They expect metrics and they want processes and hierarchy often. Instacart is an example of an ad hocracy culture. And again, if you think of a company that really had to adapt through the pandemic and really think on its feet and probably show some resilience, that would be one of them. Another type of culture that we see is a clan culture. Are there any Outlander fans here? Know a little bit about the Scottish clans? No, like you might want to think about like literally they function like a family. So it's less hierarchical, more informal communication, a really strong sense of belonging, lots of together time, strong sense of loyalty. So that's why when you kind of think of that clan mentality. So the pros are there's a really high level of teamwork, high loyalty and pride. So, if you go back to thinking of clans, think about how proud they were to be from that clan, right? Like, so oftentimes people that are in a clan culture are really proud of their workplace. Cons is that it can feel exclusive to newcomers, a little bit hard to break in, right? When you have that really tight knit unit, it can feel hard to break in. So if you go and you start working for a small family run business, that can feel hard to break in. Because people are so tightly woven together, they often don't take advice from each other. It's almost like sometimes when you think of like collective cultures, right? Like everyone has its place. And so when you try to go out of that place and come up with a new idea, sometimes that can be poo-pooed. My husband actually works, he has a family business. And when I was studying and thinking about a lot of this, I could see a lot of this show up, right? When any of them has a new idea, it's hard. It's like, wait, that's not your place. Like we all work together and we're all really proud, but like, don't rock the boat too much and move your place, right? So that's what can show up a little bit in clan culture. Tom's of Maine is an example of this, and it's actually a really interesting, you can do some case studies because they got bought out a few years ago by I believe Colgate-Palmolive, and they've been really trying to maintain that clan culture, but it's hard being owned. But they're still really working to maintain kind of that clan culture because it started with Tom and his partner, who I can't remember, but they started it. Okay, the next type that we see is a customer-focused culture. So customer first, you prioritize every single customer experience, and that is embedded through everything that people do. The pros is there's clear goals. There's never confusion. Customer's right. We're always focusing on the customer. There's usually a lot of quick wins due to referrals, because when you work at a place like that, people love your company, right? Because everyone's been a customer there. There's often a sense of pride too outside of the company that you work for this company, because they're often beloved. Cons is that the customer is always right. And that can make you feel like maybe the customer is more important than you as an employee. Financially, it can often be hard because always giving the customer the right of way can be hard because it might not always meet the bottom line. And there's always ever changing customer needs. So sort of staying on top of that and knowing the right way to proceed is hard. An example of this is Southwest Airlines. Who doesn't love the Southwest flight attendants, right? Like when you say you work for Southwest, like people are like, oh, I love it, it's so fun. Okay, next culture that we see is a hierarchy culture. This is a really traditional culture. They rely on structure, they rely on rankings. You can think banking. The pros of this is that you always know who's in charge. You know how to move up. There's a clear chain of like, I will be in this role for this long, and if I do well, then I will go to this role. So there's some safety in that, right? Like oftentimes they're really financially secure, so you feel fairly safe in the organization and you sort of know the path ahead of you. Also, people who really like to specialize and be an expert in something, this is a great culture to be too, because they focus on specialization and roles are very defined. The cons is it's less flexible. Oftentimes there's less innovation. Collaboration can be a little bit more difficult because people can be siloed and it can start to feel competitive. Example of this, I mentioned banking, Goldman Sachs. If you're thinking any of your traditional banks, like they're often very hierarchical. And there's a place for this. Some people thrive in working like this because of that sense of safety. The next type that we see is a market-driven culture. So this type of culture focuses on getting products to market fast. They're results oriented, they're aggressive. If you thrive on competition, this is a good culture to be in. The pros is you work with really, really driven, excellent, ambitious people. Usually getting into these companies is hard and competitive, so you're working with smart, bright people. There's a clear sense of what you need to do and what your metrics need to be. It's pretty cutting edge, so there's a lot of pride in that. Typically, these types of cultures are financially advantageous. They pay good salaries because they're so market driven and so competitive. The cons is there is burnout due to competition. You work long hours. It tends to be a little bit inflexible with that. And so you often need a really good leader if you're looking at a culture like this, because you know you have that competitive nature. You're going to need a good leader that's going to help people avoid burnout, avoid unhealthy competition, and avoid toxic or dishonest environments because it is so competitive. And we can all think of one of our favorite companies that describes a market-driven culture. Amazon is a really good example of that. Two more. And then I will let you guys write in the chat and I'll stop talking so much. But I think it's important to really think about the different types of cultures that are out there. Purpose-driven culture is a culture that has a shared reason for being. Giving back is really at the core of what they do. We're seeing more and more of this in companies that have a shared sense of giving back or a double bottom line. B Corps tend to fall into this. The pros is that if you're impact-driven, they're going to link your day-to-day activities with that purpose and that alignment all the time. You don't have to do that. It's very, very clear. They'll help you tie in your work. So for those people that have impact as a strong motivator, this is a good place to be. There's a shared sense of value. So you're going to be working with people who value the same thing. They oftentimes can be innovative in the way that they do link metrics to purpose. And they're not afraid to take a stand on societal issues. So you can work at a place where talking about societal issues is okay. And we all take a stand on that because we have this shared sense of purpose. So if you have a hard time separating some of your passions and society issues and work, like this could be a good, safe environment. Cons are that there can feel like a pressure between this purpose and sort of this, like, where do I stand between purpose and meeting my metrics and having revenue, right? Like it's a hard thing it's a hard place to swim in. And some people that are black and white find this hard. There can be some inconsistencies in leadership and how they drive purpose, right? Like every leader might be a little bit different in how they do that. And every team member needs to be on board. So like as you're interviewing and evaluating talent, you want to make sure that they all have that shared sense of purpose, since it's such a core part of the culture. An example of this would be REI. Toms, there's a lot of different examples of cultures like this. And finally, the last one is an innovative culture. And you see a piece of innovative and market-driven and adhocracy cultures too, but innovative cultures have constant ideation and constant new improvements. The core here is creativity and inclusive creativity. Everybody needs to be ideating and creating at all times, so it can be a really empowering place to be. There's this constant sense of newness for people who get bored quickly, right? You're constantly ideating new ideas, and that feels good. Cons, because it can feel a little secretive and competitive sometimes, because sometimes there's a competition to have the best new idea. And it can breed workaholism a little bit. Like if you think of it of an inventor, right? Like constantly tinkering until they get it right and striving for that. So that there can be burnout in this area too. So again, that sort of need for a leader to help model balance and help hold their team accountable is important. Disney, Pixar, these are examples of innovative cultures. And some of these companies live in all of them, like live a little, well, not all. Goldman Sachs doesn't live in innovative, right? But some of them do breed and swim in multiple lanes. Okay, so that is the types of cultures I want you to be thinking about, and maybe hopefully I should have said this before we started, jotting down things that you want, things that you think that you would like to see in your workplace. Maybe you already have them now, maybe you want more of them. And conversely, if some of what I'm saying is like, oh my gosh, that's why I didn't like working at company X, jot that down too, because that's good information to think about and identify. All right, next we're going to talk about what is a healthy culture. We talked about types of culture, right? Like the personality that you want to match. Now we're going to talk about how companies show they care and how they maintain a healthy environment. So I'm going to actually look at the chat again, and I'd love you to share with me some examples of a healthy culture, or elements of healthy culture that you've seen or that you're looking for. And I see, yes, we will send this deck out so you can have a list of the types of company cultures. Supportive leadership, collaboration, respect for employees, healthy home life, little talk of how tired everyone is. Yeah, right. We need to talk about that. We don't need to have martyr syndrome. Personability, a boss that shows that they care, transparency, safety, open to listening to new ideas. You guys are nailing all of that. You guys got it. And I think a lot of what we understand as a healthy culture is either we've experienced it or we've experienced the opposite. So here we go. Examples of healthy culture. A lot of the next couple of slides work come from a book that I would recommend if you geek out on culture stuff, like I do. It's called Culture Code. And it is by Daniel. Oh, where's his name? I'll write it in the chat. I'll look for it when you guys are doing your work. Daniel something wrote the book Culture Code, and he studied a lot of thriving cultures. And this is what he's come up with some of the ways to have a healthy culture and the ways to sort of destroy a healthy culture, or ways to identify an unhealthy culture. One, a healthy culture is going to be safe. You're going to have the ability to let your guard down and be your authentic self. And so that is why understanding the types of cultures that are out there is so important, because you will be your best authentic self if you're in a culture where you feel like you can be yourself and that somewhat matches your personality or the way you like to work. So that's why we talk about types of culture, because you will feel safest among your people and who work in the similar way that you do. Healthy culture is also a culture that is interconnected, where people can connect with each other and be vulnerable with each other. This is often modeled by leadership. So if you have leaders that can be vulnerable, that can admit their mistakes, if you don't have leaders that are vulnerable and admit their mistakes, you can model that, right? You can start to be vulnerable and admit your mistakes and see what develops and what happens. When I described my very first kindergarten teaching experiences, and I described the first school, the private school, I was working, the principal of the school, who was also an expert in kindergarten teaching, didn't show me any vulnerability, right? In my mind, she was perfect and she knew everything and she had all the ideas, and I needed to execute everything her way. And I didn't see vulnerability. And if I had maybe seen a little bit of vulnerability, I would have felt more connected to to that environment, and it would have been a safer place for me to try to thrive. So that's an example of that interconnected piece. And finally, healthy culture is also purpose-driven. This I mean a little bit differently than the purpose-driven type of culture. So that's a type of culture where that's the element, but every culture has to have some set established ways of doing things. So Amazon, they're called leadership principles. At a lot of places, they're called cultural values, where everyone has a shared understanding of this is how we work and this is what we value. This is the type of value we put on how we get things done. So I'm going to show you the next slide, an example of this. So most of you are probably familiar with the tech company, growing startup Slack. It's a direct messaging tool that sort of takes the place of Gmail and one of the Salesforce functions. Anyway, it was started, its CEO and colleagues started it by accident when they were trying to create a video game platform. And this is the way they communicated with each other. And because communication was such a core of what the product was, they built really early on these core principles on how they wanted to communicate and how they wanted to connect with each other. And they've been able to carry that through of growing to a couple of thousand employee company. And the ones of these, and so this is a very shared understanding. They interview through this, job descriptions show this, this is posted on their walls, their CEO talks about it and tries to model it. So that's what I mean by purpose-driven, is that it's embedded in everything. And a couple of the Slack culture values that I want to highlight and how they show up, one of them is empathy. And you're starting to see empathy a little bit more in cultural values, but a couple of years ago, you didn't see that as much. And I think it's important to point out that empathy is one of the core values of a thriving Silicon Valley competitive type of company. But the whole nature of the platform was human-human connection, right? So they want to make empathy continue to be part of that. And this is shown when you look at Slack job descriptions. They'll use things like relationship-driven or care deeply in job descriptions and what they're looking for, right? So they're using words that show that empathy is important. So sometimes you can start to see what cultural values are important to a company by looking at something like a job description. Another one I wanted to call out was playfulness. And by this, they mean like they don't want to take themselves too seriously. And they also want to allow room for play outside of work for their employees. And so this is modeled in that it is looked down upon and considered impolite if you message anyone after 6 p.m. or on the weekends. And that comes from the top down, the CEO models that, right? So that's a way that I mean that having those cultural values and purpose, a company being purpose-driven is really important to a healthy culture. All right, let's go back to talking about a couple of, on the flip side, unhealthy cultures. So an unhealthy culture would have an extreme unavailability, frequent absences or lateness, or just an inability to get a hold of people, right? Like you can't connect to people, or vice versa, constant availability, right? Like you're not seeing people take lunches, or they're staying really late, or they're working on the weekends, right? Like this extreme availability piece is a sign of maybe not a great culture. No established core values, so sort of opposite of what I just described with Slack. And then finally, a lack, I just clumped this together and titled it a lack of EQ. It's sort of just behaviors that are negative that you might see on the middle school playground, right? Like competition, gossip, seeing everything through a negative lens, public criticism, passive aggressive public criticism. That is a sign of an unhealthy culture. And you could sometimes even see this in interviews. I remember an interview I was at 15 years ago. So before I even lived in Minnesota, I was interviewing for a job. And as I was talking to the hiring manager, I came to understand through fairly passive aggressive comments that the person that I would be replacing, they didn't like and did a really bad job and nobody liked, right? Like that right away was a red flag for me, because if you are able to publicly criticize this former employee, right, maybe this is not a place that I want to work at. So be looking for things like that. So Daniel, who I'm forgetting his name, but I'm going to write it in the chat, who wrote the culture code. One of the ways he says to ensure that you are having a thriving, healthy culture where people feel like it's safe and they can be vulnerable is to really look at having an increasing belonging cues. And he identifies belonging cues as behaviors that create safe connections in groups. And he did a lot of research on cultures company cultures where employees were really satisfied. And one of the common things he saw is that a lot of employees did things like this. Things like eye contact in meetings, looking people in the eye, forms of physical contact, whether it's a high five or a pat in the back, just forms of showing that we're all in this together. Humor and laughter, active listening, attentiveness, just being courteous, mimicry, and really, so by mimicry, that means matching someone's tone or maybe relaying what someone just said, matching their energy level in a meeting, and also ensuring that everybody in the meeting has a chance to talk and that everyone is having a chance to ideate. Like these are examples of belonging cues. And what I love about this is that they're not hard to do, right? Any of us can do this. We don't need to depend on our leader, our CEO, our peers. We can start modeling this. And oftentimes when we start modeling it, we'll see it modeled back to us. Okay, so how do you identify a healthy culture? Maybe you're in a job search, maybe you soon will be. How do you start to identify, is this a healthy culture? Is this a culture that matches my personality? I've listed a couple of questions to ask. Some of the ones that I love are, what makes you proud to work for this company? Instead of, because we've all said in interviews, and I'll probably ask the question of, tell me a little bit about your company culture. I mean, it's like so vague and so big, and you'll listen to people fumble over how to answer it, right? But these get down to some specifics. What does collaboration look like? How is conflict handled? How are meetings run, right? Like these are examples of questions that you can start to ask in an interview or as you're doing informational interviews to get to the core of how things are done. What are things that you can look for as you're assessing a company or maybe within your own organization currently, right? To kind of do a gut check is, how long do people stay? Is there a clear mission displayed and discussed? How diverse is the organization, right? Diversity on so many different levels, but are we having a fair representation of the population that we serve? What is the workplace involvement like? How involved do people get in different committees? Are my leaders accessible? When do I get to see them? Is there access to professional development? And are people clear and transparent? Brene Brown, I love when she does one of her leadership books, always talks about clear is kind, right? Oftentimes we're so afraid, and I'm guilty of this too, so afraid to give any negative feedback, but really being clear and direct is kind. And so if you know that so asking questions or looking for representation around transparency and clarity of goals and clarity of performance is really a way to identify a healthy culture. Oh, thank you, Bridget. And oh, thank you, Will. Daniel Coyle, Culture Code. All right, you got it. All right, so the next slide, now it's going to be time for you guys to get together. I'll give you 6 or 7 minutes. I want to be respectful because I only have one slide after this, but we're going to get into breakout rooms of 3. And what I want you to do is come up with your own culture ambassador plan. How are you going to affect change? How are you going to find a company that's right for you or be a culture ambassador at your current company? So 1, I want you to identify some important culture traits for you, and you're going to share this with your team. So what are things that are really important to you? I can go back to the list, or maybe I'll cut and paste it into the chat of the different types of cultures that are out there. That might be helpful. And then by company crushes, I mean, like, what are some of your dream companies, right? Like companies that you think, I just love the way they do things. Once you identify that, you might be able to figure out, oh, what is it about that company that I love? Assess your current situation. What culture traits show up where you are and what don't? And then create your cultural action plan. What activities can you do to create cultural alignment? So if you're in a job search, it might be, okay, I'm looking for this type of company. These are the questions I'm going to ask. These are the things I'm going to look for in job descriptions. If you're not in a job search mode, it might be, okay, this is how I'm going to increase my belonging cues. These are some of the ways I'm going to interact with my colleagues. But come up with your own action plan. So I want you to think about those things with your small group. We'll put the questions in the chat too, because I've given you kind of a lot. All right, I think we're ready to do breakouts. Okay, welcome back, everybody.
Back to you, Maggie.
Thank you, Bridget. Welcome back, everybody. I just have one more slide and then I can open up to questions. But if anyone, this is a good time to share, if anyone did come up with any like aha moments of, yes, this is what actually is important to me in culture, and this is how I'm going to try to get it in my life or look for it in a company. Did anyone come up with anything, or did anyone hear anything insightful from their partner along those same lines?
Yeah, I think our group kind of all talked about, so I was with Tony and Uma, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it sounded like kind of what we valued, we all kind of try to model on our own, and you know, kind of be the change you want to be,
Yes.
be the change you want to see in the world. And so I think we all kind of approached our respective jobs in that way.
I love that. Is this Tyson speaking?
Yeah, it is. Sorry.
No, thank you. I love that. And that's so important. And I think that that's such a good message to leave this with is, yes, sometimes you're going to be in a culture that doesn't fit, and you're going to consistently try to fit and it doesn't. And there are questions and ways you can go about choosing something else. But in the meantime, be the change you want to be. You be the best culture ambassador, because you probably can affect change. One of the things I talk about in my motivational preferences work is that it's not up to anybody else to get you motivated at work. It's up to you. And it's usually small little things you can do to increase your motivation. And I think the same is so true for culture. So I really appreciate you saying that. I'm going to end with a slide, and then I'll open up if anyone has any questions. I'm going to end with kind of a woo-woo slide. I love Mary Oliver, the poet. And I thought that this quote was pretty appropriate when we think about change and how we learn and grow. And someone I once loved gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. And I don't share this to end on a big sad note, but just that sometimes we will be introduced with cultures that aren't a good fit, or experiences that aren't maybe the best fit. And that can be a gift. It can be a gift either because, like Tyson said, you can go about and be that culture ambassador to make that place better, or it can be a gift because it's pointing you in a direction you need to be, right? Every experience is teaching you something. And it's so true when it comes to finding a cultural fit for you. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing slides, and if anyone has any questions, just let me know. You can hang out for a little bit. Oh, can't unmute, but something I was thinking about was negative, bad workplace culture comes home with you and affects our families and people. Yes, and thank you, Bridget. It 100% does. So having a good cultural fit is important for not just you, but for everybody in your life. Yan.
Thanks, Maggie. It's amazing. Like before I came over here, I did not expect